You understand what you have wagered. I understand. Play on.
Father, what is this?
Your father owes me a debt, Chidinma. I am asking for a wife, and he keeps his crown.
I am already promised to Kelechi. The whole compound has heard.
Chidinma, I will go to your father myself. I will offer him everything I have. It is not much, but
It will not be enough. There is something else happening here.
Princess Chidinma was betrothed to a chief 3 times her age to settle her father's debt. 3 days before her wedding, to a man old enough to be her grandfather, Princess Chidinma found the letter that proved her father never owed a debt at all. He had been robbed of his kingdom in plain daylight, and he was the one who signed the paper. Stay with me till the end, because what she does with that letter is the reason this story is still told in villages across the East till today. And if stories like this keep you glued to your screen the way they did for me, do not scroll past without hitting that subscribe button, because there is another one coming right after this. It began on a night when the palace drums were silent. King Obioma sat alone in his obi, the inner chamber where only kings were permitted, with a wrapper of raffia mats hiding 4 small clay pots of palm wine and a wooden board carved with 16 holes. Across from him sat a man wrapped in the finest okwe cloth the kingdom of Umuahia-Ike had ever seen outside of a coronation. A man whose laughter came too easily and whose eyes never quite matched it. His name was Chief Ozoemena, and he was the wealthiest trader between the 2 rivers, a man who had built 3 compounds from nothing but cowries and patience. They were playing okwe, the seed game, but there was more than seeds moving across that board. There was land, there was cattle, there was the harvest tax of an entire quarter of the kingdom. And King Obioma, who had once been a careful man, who had once counted every cowrie his father left him before spending a single one, had become something else in the 2 years since the death of his first wife. He drank more than he used to. He laughed at things that were not funny. He played okwe with a man he should never have let past the palace gates. And by the 4th pot of wine, he had lost more than any king in living memory had ever lost in a single night. You understand what you have wagered, Chief Ozoemena said quietly, and there was no laughter in his voice now. King Obioma looked at the board. He looked at his own hands, unsteady from the wine, and for a moment something sober flickered behind his eyes, something that looked almost like fear. But pride is a stubborn thing in a man who has worn a crown since he was 23 years old, and pride does not like to be seen losing. I understand, the king said. Play on. By the time the cocks began to call the first light, King Obioma owed Chief Ozoemena more cowries, more yam bands, and more land than the royal treasury held. And there was only one thing left in the kingdom valuable enough to erase it all: his daughter. Princess Chidinma was 19 years old, and she did not learn of her father's debt from her father. She learned of it from her half-brother Okoye, who burst into her quarters just after sunrise, with his chest heaving and his eyes wide with something between panic and pity. Sister, the elders are gathering. Something has happened. She thought at first that someone had died. She ran barefoot across the compound, past the shrine to the ancestors, past the women already pounding yam for the morning meal, straight into the council house where her father sat with his head in his hands, and Chief Ozoemena stood beside him wearing the calm, patient smile of a man who has already won. Father, she said, what is this? King Obioma did not look at her. It was Chief Ozoemena who answered, and his voice was so gentle, so reasonable, that it took her almost a full minute to understand what he was actually saying. Your father owes me a debt no ordinary man could pay in 3 lifetimes, but I am not an ordinary man, and I am not asking for cowries. I am asking for a wife. You will come to my compound by the next full moon, and the debt is finished. Your father keeps his crown, your people keep their land. Is that not a fair trade, small one? The room was silent, except for the sound of Chidinma's own heartbeat, which she was certain everyone could hear. She said, I am already promised, and you know this. The whole kingdom knows this. I am betrothed to Kelechi, the captain of my father's own guard." Something passed over Chief Ozoemena's face then, so quick that only Chidinma, who had spent her whole life reading the faces of powerful men who did not want to be read, caught it. It was not surprise. A man who is surprised does not recover his smile in less than a heartbeat. It was something closer to satisfaction, as though she had said exactly the thing he had been waiting for her to say. "A guard," Chief Ozoemena said softly, turning the word over as if it tasted strange in his mouth. "Your father's promise to me was made with witnesses and sealed with wine. A girl's promise to a guard was made in secret under a tree where no elder stood to hear it. Which of these do you imagine the ancestors will honor?" Chidinma turned to her father, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to be the man who had taught her to ride a horse before she could properly walk, the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through the market so she could see over the crowds at the New Yam festival. She waited for him to say that no debt was worth her daughter. He did not say it. "Chidinma," King Obioma said, and his voice cracked on her name. "There is no other way. If I do not pay this debt, he takes the land by force of law, and every family on it becomes homeless before the rains return. I am asking you to save your people." "You are asking me to save yourself," and for the first time in her life, she watched her father look away from her in shame. That should have been the end of it. In most stories, this is where the girl weeps, the wedding proceeds, and everyone learns a lesson about duty. But Chidinma had grown up watching her father rule, and she had learned one thing from him that he perhaps did not intend to teach her. A good ruler asks questions before he accepts an answer. There was one more person in that council house whose face she had not paid close attention to until she was already halfway back to her quarters, replaying the whole scene in her mind the way a woman replays a wound to see exactly where it hurts most. Her half-brother Okoye had stood at the edge of the room the entire time, silent, arms folded, watching the exchange between her father and Chief Ozoemena with an expression that was difficult to name. Not grief, not shock, something closer to calculation, the look of a man doing quiet arithmetic behind a still face. Okoye was clever, ambitious in the quiet way of a man who had learned that loud ambition gets noticed and punished early, and he had watched his younger half-sister receive a mother's favor, a father's open affection, and a betrothal to a man she had chosen for love, while he himself had been quietly married off 2 years earlier to the daughter of a minor chief in a match arranged purely for the size of her father's yam bands. Chidinma did not want to suspect her own brother. She told herself walking back to the compound that evening that grief and fear were making her see conspiracy in every shadow. That a man's silence in a difficult room did not make him guilty of anything beyond discomfort. But the question would not leave her, no matter how firmly she pushed it away. Who else in the palace stood to gain if she were removed from the line of favor entirely, married off far from the compound, and no longer a daily reminder of everything Okoye's own mother had never been given? And the question that would not leave her mind as she walked back to her quarters past the whispering servants and the pitying eyes of the palace women was this: why had Chief Ozoemena, a man with 3 wives already and more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, wanted her so badly that he would engineer an entire night of drinking just to trap her father into a debt he could never repay any other way? Because that is what it was. She was certain of it, before she even reached her own door. No honest man loses that much wine-soaked confidence by accident. She had watched Chief Ozoemena at feasts before. She had watched him drink. Him win at okwe against men far more sober than her father had been that night. A man does not become the wealthiest trader between 2 rivers by leaving anything to chance. Kelechi found her that evening by the stream where they always met, in the place shielded from the compound by a worm of elephant grass, where they had exchanged their private promise 2 harvests ago under a moon that neither of them would ever forget. He was still in his guard's cloth, spear resting against a rock, and when he saw her face, he did not need to be told. "You have heard," she said. The whole compound has heard. His jaw was tight, his hands closed into fists at his sides. A man trained to protect a kingdom, now powerless to protect the one thing he actually loved. "Chidinma, I will go to your father myself. I will offer him everything I have. It is not much, but it will not be enough, she said, and hated herself for saying it, because she watched something in him break a little when she did. Kelechi, you know this. If it could be settled with what you have, it would already be settled. There is something else happening here. I do not believe my father merely lost at a game of seeds. What do you mean? She told him what she had noticed, the too quick recovery of the chief's smile, the way he had said, a girl's promise made under a tree, as though he already knew every detail of a betrothal that had supposedly been kept secret from everyone but the two of them and the moon. Kelechi went very still. No one knew about that tree, he said slowly. No one but us, and your handmaid Obioma, who swore silence. They looked at each other, and the same thought passed between them without either of them needing to say it aloud. If Chief Ozoemena knew a secret that only 3 people in the world were supposed to know, then someone close to Chidinma had been talking. And if he had known about the betrothal before he ever sat down to that game of okwe, then the debt was never about wine or wealth at all. It was about her from the beginning. This is the part that stops the story being a simple tale of a wicked chief and a helpless princess and becomes something far more tangled. So stay close, because the deeper Chidinma dug, the less anything made sense, and the palace itself was about to reveal a secret that had been buried for 18 years. Chidinma did not sleep that night. She sat by her window and thought of every person who had access to her private life. Her handmaid Obioma, whom she had trusted since she was 7 years old, and whom she believed knew everything about her. Her half-brother Okwe, ambitious and often overlooked in matters of succession, who stood to gain if her father's favorite daughter was married off and out of the way. And the palace diviner, old Nwokolo, who read cowries for the king before every important decision, and who had, curiously, been absent from the palace for 3 full days before that fateful game of okwe. She began with Obioma, gently, over the pretense of braiding her hair. "Did anyone ever ask you about me?" Chidinma said carefully, watching her handmaid's fingers in the mirror of polished brass. "About Kelechi? About the stream?" "Why do you ask, my princess?" "Because I need to know if I can still trust you." The young girl's eyes filled with tears so fast that Chidinma knew, with a sinking heart, that the answer was yes. Obioma confessed in a rush of shame. A trader's wife had befriended her at the stream months ago, had asked such innocent questions, had given her small gifts, cloth and beads, nothing that seemed to matter at the time. She had not known, she swore, that the woman worked for Chief Ozoemena's household. She had not understood what her small confidences would become. "I am sorry, my princess. I did not know I was being used." Chidinma believed her because Obioma's grief was too raw to be performance, but belief did not make the situation any less dangerous. If Chief Ozoemena had been gathering information about her for months before the game of okwe, then the debt itself was likely a trap prepared long in advance, and King Obioma had walked into it as unknowing as a goat led to slaughter, believing himself simply unlucky at a game of seeds. But why? Why go to such lengths for one princess when Chief Ozoemena could have chosen any bride from any kingdom with a single visit and a modest bride price? Chidinma turned this question over and over as she made her way to the one person in the palace old enough to remember things that happened before she was born. Her grandmother, the king's own mother, who lived apart from the main compound in a smaller hut near the ancestral shrine, half blind now, but sharper of mind than most people twice as young. "Ne," Chidinma said, kneeling before the old woman. "Did you know Chief Ozoemena's family before he became wealthy?" The old woman went very quiet, her clouded eyes fixed somewhere past Chidinma's shoulder, into a distance made of memory rather than sight. "His father's name was Ozoemena the Elder," she said finally, "and he was not always a trader. He was once a chief of the neighboring village, Ndioku, before your grandfather's father took that land in a war fought over a stolen boundary stone 40 years before you were born. The old chief lost his title, his compound, and his good name, and he died a poor man in exile, cursing our family with his last breath. His son swore in front of witnesses that one day a child of that boundary wall would kneel before him and beg. Chidinma felt the floor shift beneath her, though she had not moved at all. "You are telling me this is not about a debt of wine?" she whispered. "This is revenge for a war I never knew existed, and I am the payment." "I am telling you," her grandmother said, taking Chidinma's face in both of her weathered hands, "that some debts are older than the people asked to pay them. Your father does not know this history. He was a boy when it happened, and his father never spoke of it, out of shame, I think, for how the land was taken. But I remember, and if what you say is true, that this man arranged his ruin on purpose, then he has been waiting for this moment for 40 years, and he will not be moved by tears or by pleading. He wants to see a child of our house broken the way his father was broken. He does not simply want a young wife, Chidinma. He wants to watch the crown that took everything from his father, hand him its most precious daughter, and call it fair. This is the part that changes everything. So if this is your first time hearing a tale like this unfold, make sure you are subscribed, because what Chidinma discovers next about her own betrothed is going to surprise you as much as it surprised her. And it happened the very next morning. Chidinma went to Kelechi at dawn, before the compound had fully awakened, and told him everything her grandmother had said. She expected him to be as stunned as she was. Instead, watching his face in the grey morning light, she saw something far more complicated pass over his features. A kind of recognition, followed almost immediately by dread. "Kelechi," she said slowly, "what is it? You know something." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out towards the horizon where the sun had not yet cleared the hills. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained, the voice of a man about to hand over a secret he had guarded his entire life. "My father was not a trader who died poor in Ndioku, as everyone in this compound believes," he said. "My father was a younger brother of Ozoemena the elder. Chief Ozoemena is my uncle." Chidinma stared, certain she had misheard. "When our grandfather lost his title and his lands," Kelechi continued, "his family scattered in shame. My father, the younger son, refused to stay and watch his brother turn bitterness into a fortune built on other men's ruin. He changed nothing about his name, but he took his wife and his infant son, me, far from Ndioku, to this kingdom, where no one asked questions about a poor farmer with calloused hands and a quiet manner. He never told me who his uncle had become until he was dying 3 years ago, and even then he made me swear never to speak of it, because he said no good would come of a guard's son claiming kinship with the richest trader between two rivers. I have kept that secret my whole life, Chidinma, even from you, because I did not think it mattered. I did not think my uncle even remembered I existed." Chidinma sat down slowly on the flat stone by the stream, the same stone where they had first exchanged their promise 2 harvests ago, and for a long moment neither of them spoke at all. The birds continued their morning noise around them, indifferent to the way the ground beneath this small family had just shifted twice in as many days. She thought of every feast where Chief Ozoemena had sat near the front of the gathering, watching the palace guards take their positions, and wondered how many times his eyes had rested on Kelechi without either of them knowing what truly connected them. "He remembers," Chidinma said quietly, her mind racing now, pulling every thread together at once. "Kelechi, do you understand what this means? He did not just want to punish my father's house for the war. He found out that the son of the brother he despises, the brother he considers a coward for walking away from vengeance, was betrothed to the very princess he intended to use as his revenge. He is not only punishing my family, he is punishing yours. He wants to marry me not only to humiliate my father, but to take from you in front of the entire kingdom the one thing that would prove your father's quiet, peaceful path was the weaker choice. He wants you to watch him win everything your father walked away from." Kelechi's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from a fury he clearly been suppressing his entire adult life without knowing its true source. "Then we cannot simply ask the council for mercy," he said. A man capable of engineering 40 years of patience for a single act of humiliation will not be stopped by pleading. We need proof. We need something that shows the council this was never an honest debt. That night, Chidinma did something no princess of Umuahia-Ike had ever done before. She left the palace in the plain wrapper of a market woman, her hair covered, and made her way under cover of darkness to the compound of old Nwokole, the diviner who had been mysteriously absent for 3 days before the game of okwe that ruined her father. She found him not sleeping, but sitting awake beside a small fire, as though he had been expecting a visitor for a very long time. "You knew," she said without preamble. "You knew what Ozoemena planned." The old diviner's face, lit orange by the flames, showed no surprise at all, only a deep and tired sadness. "I did not know everything," he said, "but I knew enough. 3 days before that game, Chief Ozoemena came to me with cowries enough to feed my household for a year, and he asked me to travel to my sister's village on urgent family business so that I would not be present in the palace to read the signs before your father sat down to play. A diviner who is absent cannot warn a king of danger he cannot see. I took the cowries, princess, because my sister truly was ill, and I told myself no real harm would come of one missed reading. I did not know he intended to ruin your father so completely. I have carried the shame of it since the moment I returned and heard what happened. If you are asking whether I will speak the truth before the council, the answer is yes. I have been waiting for someone brave enough to ask me." Chidinma thanked him and rose to leave, but at the door of his hut she paused and turned back once more. "Why did you wait for someone to ask, Nwokole? You could have gone to the council yourself the moment you understood what had been done." The old man's shoulders sagged. "Because a diviner who confesses his own error unprompted is called honest, princess, but a diviner who is dragged into the light by someone braver than himself is simply called guilty. And I was afraid of which one the elders would see. That is my shame to carry, not yours. But you asked, so I will not hide behind my fear any longer." It was not the physical proof Chidinma had hoped for, but it was something far more valuable. A witness, a man of respected standing, whose word the elders would not easily dismiss, willing to testify that the debt was engineered from the very beginning by a chief with a 40-year-old grudge and a hidden nephew he despised. But a witness alone, she knew, might not move elders who respected wealth as much as they respected truth. She needed one more thing. She needed to understand exactly how deep Chief Ozoemena's fortune actually ran, because a man who claimed a debt he could not truly afford to forgive was a very different threat than a man who could. And this is where the story takes its sharpest turn yet, the one that even I did not see coming the first time I heard it told by an old woman under a mango tree many years ago. So if you have made it this far, you already know this is not a story that lets you rest. The next part changes who the real villain is and who the real hero has been all along. Word reached Chidinma 2 days later through a market woman who traded cloth near Kelechi's late father's old farmland that Chief Ozoemena's fortune was not as bottomless as the whole kingdom believed. His compounds were grand, yes. His cloth was fine, yes. But a great deal of his apparent wealth existed as promises, loans extended to other chiefs and traders across 3 kingdoms, debts owed to him that had not yet been collected, land he claimed but had not fully paid for. All of it balanced on a reputation for ruthlessness rather than actual coin in hand. If this was true, then King Obioma's supposed debt, the land, the cattle, the harvest tax, was worth far more to Chief Ozoemena in reality than he had let on, because he needed that land not only for revenge, but to cover debts of his own that were quietly coming due. He needed the marriage to happen quickly, before anyone examined his finances too closely, because a princess bride and a kingdom's worth of land would silence any trader that dared question whether the great Chief Ozoemena could truly cover what he owed. There was still the matter of Okoye,
and Chidinma could not shake her feeling that she had not yet asked him the one question that mattered. She found him the next afternoon near the goat pen at the edge of the compound, away from the ears of servants, and she did not soften her approach the way she might have a season earlier. "Did you know," she asked him plainly, "that Chief Ozoemena has been planning this longer than any of us imagined?" Okoye's face did something complicated, guilt and relief moving across it almost at once, and for a moment Chidinma's stomach dropped, certain she was about to hear a confession that would break whatever remained of their fragile bond as siblings. "I did not know the full shape of it," he admitted quietly, "but I knew Ozoemena had approached me months ago, asking careless questions about you, about the guard you are fond of, dressed up as idle palace gossip. I did not think much of it at the time. I answered him the way I would answer any elder who came asking, because I did not yet understand what he intended to do with the answers. When I learned what had happened at that game of okwe, I understood, and I have been sick with the shame of it since, sister, because I told myself I was not responsible for a debt I never asked our father to owe. But silence is its own kind of debt, and I have been carrying it badly." It was not the betrayal Chidinma had feared, but it was still a wound, a reminder that the trap laid for her family had many more threads reaching into it than she had first believed, each one small and seemingly harmless on its own, each one gathered patiently over months by a man who had waited 40 years and was in no hurry to be careless now. Okoye, to his credit, did not ask for forgiveness. He only asked what he could do to undo what he had unknowingly helped to build. And from that day on, he stood beside his sister at every turn, carrying messages between the diviner's compound and Kelechi's old farmland under cover of ordinary errands, so that no one watching the palace gates would suspect anything unusual was underway. Kelechi's late father, it turned out, had left behind more than a hidden name. In the small farmland he had worked so quietly for 20 years, refusing to touch a single cowrie of his brother's fortune, he had instead built something Kelechi himself had never fully understood until now, a modest but honest trading partnership with 3 other families along the river route, built slowly, season after season, on trust rather than fear. It was nothing compared to Ozoemena's declared wealth, but it was real. Every cowrie of it existed, counted and verified by families who had traded with Kelechi's father for 20 decades and trusted his son by extension.
"My father used to tell me," Kelechi said, standing before Chidinma with the ledgers his father had kept hidden beneath a false floor in their old home, "that a small fortune honestly earned will always outlast a great fortune built on fear, because fear eventually runs out of places to hide." I never understood what he meant until tonight. The council was called on the morning before the full moon, the very day Chidinma was meant to be delivered to Chief Ozoemena's compound as a bride. The whole kingdom gathered outside the council house, drawn by rumors that something unusual was about to happen, that the princess herself had requested to speak before the elders rather than simply accept her fate in silence. King Obioma sat pale and uncertain at the head of the gathering, still believing, even then, that there was no way out of the debt he had created. Chidinma stood before the council in the wrapper of a princess, not a market woman, and she did not weep and she did not plead. She told them everything. The 40-year-old roar over a boundary stone, the old chief's dying curse, Chief Ozoemena's true nephew standing among the palace guard, the diviner sent away on borrowed cowries so he could not warn the king, and finally, the truth about a fortune built more on fear than on gold. Chief Ozoemena, who arrived expecting a wedding, stood very still as each piece of the story unfolded before the assembled elders, and Chidinma watched the practiced calm on his face crack for the first time since she had known him. "This is the invention of a frightened girl," he said, but his voice for the first time did not carry the easy confidence it always had. "Then explain this," old Nwokolo said, stepping forward from the crowd. why you paid me to leave the palace 3 days before the king sat down to play a game he had never before lost so badly in his life. Explain why a diviner's absence was worth so much to you if you had nothing to hide." A murmur moved through the gathered crowd like wind through elephant grass. The elders exchanged glances. King Obioma, hearing for the first time the full shape of what had been done to him, rose slowly from his seat, and for a moment Chidinma feared he might simply collapse under the weight of it. Okoye stepped forward next, before his father could fully recover his composure, and told the council of the careless questions Ozoemena had put to him months earlier, questions he had answered without understanding their purpose. It cost him something to say it in front of the whole gathered kingdom, to admit his own small part in a scheme he had not fully understood until it was too late, but he said it anyway, because Chidinma had taught him in the space of a few short days that silence carried a weight of its own. The crowd, hearing a son of the palace confess his own error so plainly, seemed to lean further toward the princess's account rather than away from it, and Chidinma watched Chief Ozoemena's composure slip a little further still. "Is this true?" the king asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you plan my ruin before I ever sat at that board?" Chief Ozoemena's silence answered the question more completely than any words could have. He looked, for the first time since Chidinma had known him, like an old man rather than a powerful one, the fine aso-oke cloth suddenly too grand for the smallness of what stood beneath it. He opened his mouth twice to speak and closed it again, and the crowd, sensing the shift the way a village senses rain before the first cloud appears, began to murmur his father's name and the old story of the boundary stone, which many of the eldest among them remembered far better than they had ever let on before, as though the truth had simply been waiting all these years for someone brave enough to drag it back into the light. 40 years, Old Nwokolo said quietly into the silence, is a very long time to wait for a wound to close on its own, Chief Ozoemena. But hatred does not heal a man. It only teaches him patience. It was the head elder, a woman named Adara, who served 3 kings in her lifetime and who feared no chief's wealth, who finally spoke the words that would decide everything. A debt built on deception is no debt before the ancestors. A game played by a man kept blind on purpose by a diviner is not a fair contest, and no honest court in this kingdom or any other would uphold its outcome. Chief Ozoemena, you have wagered your reputation on a lie 40 years in the making, and today that lie has been laid bare before your own kin, your own debtors, and this entire kingdom. Whatever debt truly exists between you and King Obioma will be settled honestly, in the open, before witnesses who owe you nothing, not with the body of a princess who was never yours to claim. The recording that followed did not happen quickly, and it did not happen the way anyone expected, which is exactly why this story has outlived 100 simpler ones told beside 100 other fires. Kelechi stepped forward before the whole council, and for the first time in his life, he spoke openly of his father's name and his uncle's crime, offering the honest fortune his father had built in silence, modest but real, verified by 4 families who had no reason to lie, to settle whatever portion of King Obioma's debt could be proven genuine and untouched by trickery. It was not charity, Kelechi made that clear before the elders. It was, he said, the debt of a nephew who had inherited his father's shame at watching his brother turn grief into cruelty, and who would rather spend everything he owned to let that cruelty win one more time. The elders, moved by the strange justice of it, a hidden nephew redeeming with honest coin what an uncle tried to steal with a rigged game, accepted the offer, and what remained of the debt once Ozoemena's deception was stripped away and only the honest wager remained, was small enough that it vanished entirely against what Kelechi's family could pay. Chief Ozoemena did not go quietly. He argued, he threatened, he reminded the elders of every trader across 3 kingdoms who owed him coin. But Adara simply reminded him in front of everyone that a man who built his fortune on fear discovers very quickly how few people are willing to defend him once that fear no longer has teeth.
Within a season, it was said, 3 of the traders who once bowed lowest to Chief Ozoemena were the first to call in every loan he owed them, having heard exactly how thin his web really was. He kept his compounds, he kept his title, but he never again sat across an okwe board from a king, and he never again spoke his brother's name or his nephew's in public. King Obioma, humbled in a way that no amount of wine could ever repeat, called his daughter to him that evening, alone, without elders or courtiers, and for the first time since the night he lost everything at that board, he wept in front of her. I almost gave you away to settle a debt I never truly owed. I do not know how to ask you to forgive a father who nearly did that. You do not have to ask, Chidinma told him. You only have to remember what it cost, so that no daughter of this house is ever wagered again. She married Kelechi before the next full moon, not as payment for anything, not to settle any ledger, but because it was the promise they had made to each other under a tree long before any chief or any debt had tried to take it from them. The kingdom that once watched her be traded like cattle for her father's mistakes now watched her stand beside a guard's son who had turned out to be far wealthier in the things that mattered than the uncle who despised him. Ijeoma stood among the women that day, forgiven long ago and trusted again, having learnt the hard way that kindness offered by strangers sometimes carries a price attached to it that only becomes visible much later. Okoye stood beside his father, no longer at the edge of rooms but near the center of them, giving at last a portion of the trust he had spent his whole life quietly hoping for, not because he demanded it, but because he had proven when it mattered most that he could carry the truth even when it cost him something. Old Nwokolo returned to his hut by the shrine and never again accepted cowries from a man asking him to look away from what the signs were trying to show him. And it was said that his readings in the years that followed grew sharper and more trusted than they had ever been before, as though the shame of that one absence had burned something clean in him. But do not think this story ends the way the simplest tales do, with everyone smiling and every wound fully healed, because that is not how these things truly work, and it is not how the old women who first told me this story ended it either. King Obioma never fully trusted himself with an okwe board again. Chief Ozoemena lived out his remaining years wealthy but increasingly alone, watching from a distance as the nephew he had tried to destroy became in time a respected voice among the very traders who once feared the Ozoemena name. And Chidinma, though she found her happiness, never forgot the lesson her grandmother had given her in that small hut by the shrine, that some debts are older than the people asked to pay them, and the only way to truly settle them is to refuse with everything you have to let them be paid in silence. If a story like this stayed with you the way it stayed with me the first time I heard it, that is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. So make sure you are subscribed before you go, because the next one is already waiting, and I promise you, it will not let you look away either.